Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast. We're from the Niche Case, the niche-case.com, where we like to type out some words about Aotearoa sport. And if you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, or watching on YouTube, we also like to spin a big old kōrero about Aotearoa sport as well. And we also recorded our Patreon podcast earlier in the week, and we did touch on the Blackcaps. And I'm curious, Nico the Wildcard, always here with me on the podcast format. What did you take away from our discussion about the Blackcaps from their T20 series in Pakistan over the last 48 hours? Because it is sneaking in the background. We're not really putting the T20 series on a massive pedestal against Pakistan, but I am curious from our discussion, what sat with you over the last few days about Blackcaps cricket?
I think it's probably a matter of the opposition as much as it is for the Blackcaps, and how they've come from playing at home against Sri Lanka with a very similar squad, all the IPL guys missing and whatnot. And now they're in Pakistan playing in Pakistani conditions against full strength Pakistan team pretty much, because none of those Pakistan guys get selected for the IPL, which is, I think there's been a very clear, particularly in the first two games, a very clear difference in terms of the quality that they're up against. But I also find that kind of fascinating from I hesitate to call it a development standpoint, because it's not like we're talking about an age grade team or anything like that. These are the best players that were available to the Blackcaps, guys that they definitely think that are ready to contribute now to the team in some way. I just find that kind of fascinating, that it's you've had the more favorable opportunity, and now you've got quite a tough situation to battle through. And I find that really fascinating, and a kind of sit back and just see who sinks, who swims, which players step up, who what the aggregates look like at the end of it is going to be quite interesting, because you can't, especially in T20s, you can't just judge the dude on one performance. You sort of got to look at the full series, and they are doing a good job of just letting guys ride it out. Chad Bowes is playing a lot of these games. Can't remember if he's playing at the moment, because Latham's been opening in the T20 things. I actually haven't watched much of I haven't seen any of us batting. I have seen a couple of times where we were bowling when I woke up and it was still going. But it's a pretty interesting experiment from that point of view, where it's okay, we don't have the best Blackcaps available, but here's the next lot. Here's the depth on display. In them in a simpler situation. Now I've seen them in a tough situation. It's kind of it's good experience all around, isn't it?
It's pretty intense when you're in Pakistan, batting against Harris Ralph, Shaheen Shah Afridi,
or bowling to Babar Azam and Mohammed Khan.
Yeah, and Nazim Shah, all those dudes are bowling over 140 Ks. They're swinging the ball in front of a hostile crowd. And then it's okay, Ben Lister's bowling too, Babar Azam and Rizwan going, Burko in their homeland. So I think it's interesting. You went back to the Sri Lanka series. If you go, there was also the series in India, and that was very similar because it was in their home conditions against very good international players. So there's this is, and you also brought up the development idea. This is the summer of development, because some lads went to India and they got torched by India by India's best players. Fair enough, all good. You learn your lessons, you come back to New Zealand. So you've already gone to India in a summer. Then you come back to New Zealand for most of those dudes. You play against Sri Lanka in New Zealand. You get a bit of juice. You put into action what you learned. And then straight away you're off to Pakistan. So it's the rigors of the touring and the competition is all very, I believe it's all very good, potent growing conditions for development. And it's going to be interesting, as you said, who emerges as the best players from this group. And if we think to next summer, we can think back to this summer and be oh, those are when some of these dudes really started to kick on and put into action what they'd learned.
So even a year ago, there was that European tour as well,
Exactly.
wasn't there? When they were playing against Scotland and Ireland and Netherlands a bit, and it's a nice refresher, isn't it, for the team's depth? Not necessarily the first 11 stuff, but like at a time when, as we know, players that have been key players for this team for quite a few years are no longer playing. You start listing like Taylors and Ling, um, Bolts at the moment, Guptills and etc. De Gronholm. Like it's not a bad time to be replenishing the stocks either. Like this, the timely aspect of this is pretty nice.
Pick up the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/EL Niche Case. We drop an extra podcast there every week. And if you do want to support the Niche Case and any of our content, Patreon is the best way to do so. Patreon.com/El Niche Case. Tomorrow is also Friday, which means we've got our email newsletter coming out via Substack, thenichecase.substack.com. Sign up, and it comes straight to you on a Friday evening, touching on lots of bits and bobs about Aotearoa sport. And this is a low-key, really funky time for the under-18 and under-19 competitions in rugby league competitions. Under-18s in New South Wales, SG Ball, and you've got under-19s in Queensland. The Queensland competition under-19s is actually a final. Redcliffe Dolphins versus Townsville Blackhawks, and there's Elijah Rasmussen. He is a big bopper. He went to Westlake Boys High School. He's starting on the front row. You've also got John Whinianga-Fo is starting in number 6, and he is an absolutely dynamic unit out of Auckland Grammar School. He was playing first 15 rugby there. Now he's starting number 6 for the Redcliffe Dolphins under-19 team. He scored 3 tries last weekend in their semi-final, and he also kicked all of their goals, so he's all right. In SG Ball, we've got Panthers versus Knights. The Knights have a whole bunch of players: Jerome Falemo, Elijah Leao Moana. You've also got Jaden Harris and Tama Kaimoana Whare Aorere. Bailey Carmichael from Rotorua. He is on the extended bench. He hasn't featured much this season for that Knights team, but the Knights, they've got I think it's them and the Roosters had the most Kiwi-NRL juniors in their team all season, and the Knights are now in a final. And then you've got the Eels versus Raiders. The Eels have Te Huranui Twiddle, who scored 2 tries from fullback last week in their semi-final, and he's there at fullback again. You've also got Siamani Luluwai starting at centre. He's from Northland, and he's starting at centre for the Raiders. So I'll be breaking that down in the email newsletter tomorrow, along with anything else that's on my agenda for the Kiwi Sports Ranks. You got any thoughts? You tend not to, but here's your chance for the email newsletter plug coming out tomorrow evening.
Well, one thing we talked about a bit in the Patreon podcast at the start of the week was about the under-20 football men's World Cup that's coming up in about a month's time. And unless they name the squad in the next 24 hours, in which case I'll just talk about the squad, I'm kind of like, I want to do a little bit of sleuthing on that. Like, it's not up to me to start suggesting like this player should be picked, this player should be picked, but I wouldn't mind looking through, because they had the under-19s qualifiers last year. They also had a little mini tournament thing in, I can't remember where they went, like Singapore or Indonesia or something like that. Like 2 months ago, probably, which was also an under-20 squad with a lot of the same players, but not all the same players. And then there would have been a few players in that under-23 squad that played, which was really under-22 squad that played against China, who also would still be eligible for that. So I might just go through and see which players sort of cross over all of them, the players you can therefore expect to see in that squad, and a little bit of speculation, see how that's going, see how that's shaping up in terms of what we've been told from the selectors and the coaches as to who the best players of that age grade are.
So as you might be catching the vibe, we've got plenty of Aotearoa sporting things for you to enjoy. We've got 2 podcasts a week, Check-In with the Variety Show on a Tuesday, Nichecast on a Thursday. We've got our website that is constantly updated with deep dives into Aotearoa sporting topics, theniche-case.com. And you can support everything directly via Patreon, and there's an extra podcast on Patreon. And also, every Monday and Friday, there's an email newsletter coming straight to your inbox with Kiwi sports information. We're attacking from all angles. Circle the opponent and creep in attacking from all angles. That's what we do for Aotearoa sport. Mindfulness.
Yeah, while you're attacking from all angles, might want to keep in mind this bit of wisdom from Miyamoto Musashi, who said, to wield the long sword well, you must wield it calmly.
Oh. Yeah, we're not going crazy.
No, no,
We're
no.
not we're not attacking from all angles like the berserkers.
Yes.
We wield the long sword calmly. But a Shaolin styles. Obviously, Shaolin is different to the samurai, but both need a bit of peaceful aggression, maybe.
It's a bit of the old like with power comes responsibility kind of thing, isn't it? It's you have access to this great weapon, but it's not actually a great weapon if you don't use it in an appropriate manner. If you don't use it to its uh, with the full respect of the strength that you hold, kind of thing.
And I'd also suggest like staying calm is also quite useful.
Pretty useful in all manners, isn't it? It's one of them. You don't have to be wielding a sword to make better decisions when you're calm and composed.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole point of mindfulness is to give us opportunities to learn about about staying calm and how to stay zen, which is what we're here to do and share that gospel just quickly. So just to start off our platter of Aotearoa sport, this weekend we've got Blacksticks Pro League Hockey. That's going down in Christchurch. Both teams, we got men and women. They both play, they both have games against Great Britain first up. That is on Saturday, I believe. No, that's on Sunday. So men are on Saturday, women are on Sunday, excuse me. And then on Anzac Day, you've got the New Zealand women and the men facing Australia. And then next weekend it happens again, but we'll just focus on this weekend. Both teams play Great Britain, both teams play Australia. And as this is in the Pro League, so we've got a Pro League ladder for us here. And the women, I do remember they played China and United States in Wellington, and that was rather underwhelming for the Blacksticks women. They are 7th on the ladder out of 9 teams. They've got 1 win, 2 draws, and a loss. The men, they are at the bottom of the ladder. They are 9th out of 9 teams. They've had no wins, a draw, and 3 losses. So the men, Australia and Great Britain are mid-table. The women, Great Britain is last. They've lost all 4 games, and Australia is up in second. But I did check the Great Britain women, they played 4 games against Argentina, and Argentina are first. So they lost all 4 games to Argentina, which isn't it doesn't mean Great Britain are a bad team at the moment. But it will be interesting, especially the women, how they fare coming up against Great Britain this weekend, because they were underwhelming. I think they've got a new coach, Phil Burrows. They were underwhelming against China and the United States. They went backwards a lot, which is never a good sign. And it's like, yeah, it was just a lot of going backwards, a lot of getting stuck, and a lot of mediocre defense against 2. Let's be honest, they're not the best Pro League teams, and the Kiwis looked underwhelming against them. So I am curious how they look against Great Britain, because Great Britain haven't had a win yet. And if the Kiwis can defeat Great Britain and get a bit of mana, get a bit of attacking flair into their hockey, that will be very interesting. Because Australia is always a tricky matchup for men's and women's hockey. Like, we can't expect hockey victories against Australia. That is more likely to happen on the women's side, but still not expecting it. And the men coming up against Great Britain should be interesting. They did go to India last year, where they played a few games, and they weren't crash hot either. So it's going to be interesting to see whether these Blacksticks teams can get wins. Lots of changes in the squad. Both squads, you've got players returning, players unavailable, not a lot of cohesion, not a lot of combinations being built there. But as I read the press release, there is a lot of optimism. They great opportunity to expose new and exciting talent. International hockey, says Phil Burrows, a women's coach, and not Greg Nickel. He says we have a wealth of talent in our country, and these games will give our emerging players a chance to shine. And I'm confident that they will rise to the challenge, represent our country with pride, and demonstrate the strength of New Zealand hockey. To preview all of that, I don't know if any of that's going to happen. I hope it happens, and I hope we get some wins and a bit of razzle-dazzle hockey. Everyone has fun. But based on how the Pro League campaign has gone so far, not high hopes for any of that happening. But I want to be wrong here, and we'll be curiously observing this. We'll write a big preview tomorrow, and those games are happening this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know. You called it optimism, but if you put those quotes through the PR filter translator, I'm not sure it's particularly the first bit where it's like great opportunity to expose young talent to it. That makes it sound like we're going to pick a bunch of young players and probably lose. Like through the translator, that's kind of what that sounds like a bit. Hopefully that's not the case, but it's.
Well, you do like. So that was the women's coach, and you do have Kelsey Smith, who is a certified international player. She's back in the mix, which is good. But the thing that's giving me pause here is that there's so much young talent in New Zealand sport. So maybe the thing that has been missing is injecting all these young players into international hockey, because as we're seeing across a lot of other sports, the youngsters are freakishly talented. Like the youngsters coming through into the NRL from New Zealand, amazing. The young footballers, men's and women's, most talented ever. The cricketers, there's no shortage of young cricketers impressing in domestic cricket. We're going to talk about NBL. There's a lot of young basketball players, men's and women's, and I'm curious if these teams, which they do, skew younger, and lots of new players, because there's players playing professionally in Europe and whatnot. So there's a lot of opportunities, but to counter that, like international hockey is, yeah, it's like any time you do go younger, your chances of winning decrease. So it's like it's balancing out. There's a lot of cool young talent. Curious to see how it performs, but young talent usually doesn't help you win this level of international fixtures. It'd just be interesting. I'm just trying to learn. Let's just say that I'm just trying to learn from this weekend.
Yeah, I can't help but make the jaded football ferns comparison. The talent's unquestionable, but you just it's if it's not quite ready, like you're not going to win straight away. It might mean that you're in a better position in 4 years' time when those players have been given these extra experiences, like a boost in their development and all this. But it's not necessarily the win now move. But then, of course, with the football ferns, they kind of didn't have a choice. With the hockey stuff, it sounds like they kind of don't really have a choice at the moment. You pick the players who are available, and if you take what you got on the show. But yeah, it's whenever that's happening, it's probably best to push the expectations a little bit further down the road rather than the here and now stuff.
Still being fascinated by a lot of the football ferns' reaction and how much it differs to what we saw with the White Ferns ahead of their World Cup. And like, it seems very random and sporadic and weird how people put the focus on different coaching situations and different teams, because like the Black Sticks women have been underperforming as well. No one gives a shit. People tend not, like, I've never seen anyone really talk about the football ferns coach before, but now everyone gives a shit about how the football ferns, like. And another one I've heard, we don't need to, like, I'm not going to let you reply because
fair enough. I'm sure whatever it is, I've already written about it.
We need to keep this moving. but there's this like idea about no consequences for the football fans, no accountability for the football fans. There was zero, there was like less consequences, there was less accountability for the White Ferns before their World Cup. Like they were losing before their World Cup and no one gave a shit. Everyone thought that it will like magically flip around for the World Cup. So as I learn about this, I remind myself and for our audience on the podcast and on the YouTube, just keep in mind anything you're seeing about the football ferns is very different to the White Ferns, even though the White Ferns were in a worse position prior to their World Cup. Let's get into NBL basketball teams, NBL basketball, sorry, and we're going to focus on the top 4 teams. I was kind of surprised, like there's 10 teams in these NBLs, and like obviously that's been the same every year. That's a lot of basketball teams, and shout out to basketball because all those teams are flush with local players, overseas players, high caliber of basketball being played. But the top 4 teams, and these top 4 teams each have 2 wins. Auckland Tuatara are undefeated. Hawke's Bay 2-1. Franklin Bulls 2-1. Otago Nuggets are also undefeated. I talked about the Hawks on the variety show. Was there anything that you'd like to add about the Hawks before we move on to the Tuatara, the Franklin Bulls, and the Otago Nuggets?
It's not so much adding to it as it is just repeating the prominent aspect, which is that Hawks team is kind of just a collection of the funkiest Kiwi basketballers going around. Like they've kind of just put together the best group of entertaining and also talent players, like on whatever that graded graph looks like. They're nice and high on the right hand side there, and they've also got Everard Bartlett as a first year coach. Jared Kenny doing the player GM thing. It just seems like it's such a well. And the Hawks have been a good team for a long time as well. Like they've been a strong team for many years. They seem to have a little bit more of the homegrown aspect. Like they're not relying on a 1 or 2 superstar imports to come in and do a lot of the things. They just seem like a really well, almost like springing from the grassroots kind of organized team. And they're really good and they're really fun. And there's definitely a few of those players who are trying to let the scouts know that they deserve Aussie NBL opportunities as well as the Kiwi stuff.
Speaking of the Aussie NBL, we've got the Tuatara, the Auckland Tuatara, and they have Ruben Tarangi as a key player. There's also NBL players, Australian NBL players, Cameron Glidden and Rob Lowe from the Breakers, and Gerard Weeks, who spent time with the Breakers, but he wasn't playing for them last season. I think he was with Tansy.
The last 2 years, I think he's been there, but was Breakers player for a couple of years before that.
Also, Tuatara also have big man Nicholas Barrow, who's a consistent NBL figure as well. How has Ruben Tarangi been playing? Because he's not with the Breakers, so there is you don't know as much about Ruben Tarangi, but he's a very important player for the Tuatara, arguably one of the best players in the NBL. How did he perform in the Australian NBL, just to give us some context around what he's doing right now?
Well, the funny thing about that, I'm just checking to see what he's getting up to in the thing. But the funny thing about that is I think his Aussie NBL season was probably the worst one he's had for quite a while. Like his shooting percentages were down, his minutes were down a bit as well. A lot of those like on court, off court stuff was not too flash from Tarangi, but I don't know. That's first of all, that's motivation to come back and be stronger. Second of all, it's a credit to him in other areas that's not a defining factor for him. Like he can be at the Phoenix there and be playing his best basketball in terms of like the stats, the production stuff, but is still such a key member of that organizer, like kind of got a undoubted leadership role with he defensively fantastic. Like they love him there. They've re-signed him a couple of times. He's he's got that he's got that aura around him where it no longer matters specifically. Like he's still a guy who's going to get a certain amount of minutes and contribute um in those sneakier kind of making other dudes around him better kind of ways, giving others the confidence to thrive, even if his own shot isn't falling kind of thing. So he's at that level. That's cool. But his shot wasn't falling. Like that's still also true to say that production wise, is probably his worst season for a little while. So it's pretty encouraging to see him bouncing back to the NZ stuff and just like sizzling. You know, it's showing what he's capable of, because he definitely is one of the best players in this competition.
The Franklin Bulls also have a bunch of breakers: Isaac Davidson, Daniel Fotu, and Darrell Brantley, who Jarrell, he did go to the NBA. He went to play for Utah, I think, after the NBL season. I think it might have been only a 10-day whopper. So who knows what he's up to now. But he did go from the NBL to the NBA. There's also Jaden Bazant, who was on the Breakers roster, and Terrell Harrison, who he's been playing in Australia for an Australian NBL team, but he's also a Kiwi Tall Black as well. Do you have any more information about Terrell Harrison in the Franklin Bulls team? And I mean, big minutes for Daniel Fotu and Isaac Davidson, which is important as well.
Yeah, they're a funky team, the Franklin Bulls. GM Mika Vukona as well, which is interesting. But maybe more pertinent to this chat is they're coached by Daniel Sokolovsky, who is a Breakers assistant, which is probably why they've got a bunch of fringe Breakers players. Like they don't have the players. Abercrombie's not playing this season, but Rob Lowe's playing for the Tuatara and playing excellently, as he always does at this level. And Glidden's there as well, isn't he? So there's a little sprinkling of Breakers guys around some of these other clubs, but Franklin seem to have all of the fringe lads, because they've got, as you say, they got Fotu, they've got a Bazant who was there for like an injury replacement stint briefly. They've got Jamal Brantley, so the brother Brantley, who played like a game or two at the start of the year as an injury replacement and stayed with the team the whole through. Like he was there basically as a practice player and would have stepped up if another importer got injured, but they never did, so that wasn't required of him. But he stayed around long enough to be sticking around further. His brother goes over to the NBA and he goes over to the NBL. It's like nice family ties there. And yeah, they do seem to have like the Breakers depth thing going on there. But Terrell Harrison is not Breakers affiliated. He is Brisbane affiliated, and Mika Vukona has done some stuff with Brisbane, I think, in the front office. So that's probably part of that. Because I don't know how often, I'd have to check this, but I don't know how often Terrell Harrison has actually come back and played the Kiwi NBL stuff. I don't want to call it Cells NBL because I don't like shouting out the sponsors when they're not sponsoring me. That's for the internal stuff to be doing. Like that's the in-house marketing job. It's not really my marketing job, unless I can get free pieces for it. But Terrell Harrison normally does the NBL 1 stuff, which is like the off-season, lower level Australian league. He's not doing that this year. He's playing the Kiwi stuff with Franklin, and he is definitely like he's a big man. He's a bit injury prone in the last season. Like he didn't play as much because he wasn't fit for, which was a shame because it sort of felt like it might have been a breakthrough season for him if he'd been able to. He's just a guy who rebounds really well. As a big body, he'll finish around the rim. He'll set a few screens. He's going to be very physical. You can't move him. Like he's a fun player to watch. And I did highlight him on the variety show when I was listing like the funky guys that check out for these guys. I'm curious to see how they perform across the season kind of thing. He was one of them. And so far, so good. I think he's been pretty handy. And I room to like significant room to improve as well on that count. He's a fun player. Yeah, one of those like 15 and 10 kind of stat lines every night kind of thing is what he should be aiming for, I would suggest.
And we've also got the Otago Nuggets, who have Sam Timmins, who was also in the Breakers roster.
Yeah, there's another one of them.
Other than that, I don't know too many players in this Otago team. So if the Otago team stay winning basketball games as they have done, they're 2-0. I will be learning more about these Otago players. But at the moment, the only notable lad that stands out to me is Sam Timmins. He's another big bopper. So you got plenty of. That's the interesting thing about the NBL, I reckon, is there is definitely a desire to shoot the 3-pointer. Like everyone wants to be shooting threes. But that doesn't come at the expense of getting the ball to the big man. So every team's got a big man, and all of those big men, you mentioned Ty Wynyard on the variety show. Terrell Harrison's a big unit. Rob Lowe's a big unit. Sam Timmins is a big unit. All those dudes will beat you up down low. They'll put a spin on you. They'll get a layup, or they'll do a post move or whatever. So it's like these two worlds of basketball are operating at the same time, where the 3-point revolution is there because all the players want to shoot 3-pointers. But also, if you've got the teams aren't afraid to get the ball down to the big man and let him get out some mahi down low.
Yeah, I mean, Ty Wynyard the other day scoring 35 points is a nice example of that. Well, Daryl Morey would be proud, like your 3-pointers and you're scoring close. You don't need there are some excellent mid-range shooters, but it's definitely a relatively quick modern style of play. With the Nuggets, I haven't watched that much of them. I can't speak too much. I'm just looking at their roster. They do have so their imports are Todd Withers and Jaquari McLaughlin, who are Americans. Both look pretty handy scorers, been quite influential. They also have Australian Michael Harris in there. And Sam Timmins, of course, is definitely someone to watch out for, who's going to be doing that big man scoring in close, getting the rebound stuff. They're it's the kind of team where, as you say, like we sort of have to watch and learn and see how things go. I would say the caveat with them is that they're 2-0. Both their games have been home games, which is definitely they're one of the teams that get I would suggest quite a handy home. Probably do actually, because the crowds aren't huge in the NBL, but they're hearty. It's good value that you get from your home fans. And who'd they play? They played Manawatu and Southland. So I don't think those teams are going to be top 4 teams. In which case, like, maybe things have been like the draw's been slightly fortunate to them, and they might be a little bit misleading as an undefeated team. But as you say, we will wait and see. They are well coached. Brent Matahare is their head coach there, and I mean, I think another aspect probably of the NBL is it's easy to look at the rosters like exciting players, like exciting domestic players popping up. I think the coaching levels is pretty fantastic as well. Because where are we? I'm looking at so Aaron Young at the Tuatara, he's a Kiwi fellow. Judd Flavel at the Canterbury Rams. Daniel Sokolovsky at the Bulls, he's American, but he works with the Breakers, so he's based here as well. He's committed to the scene. Everard Bartlett at the Hawks. Natu Taufale at the Manawatu Jets. Nelson, we've got Michael Fitchett. Matahare at the Nuggets. Guy Malloy with Southland Sharks, who is Australian but coaches the Tall Ferns and has coached in the NBL as well in the past too. Trent Adam at Taranaki. Saints have got Troy McLean. Like, it's 8 out of 10 coaches are New Zealanders, and the other 2 are based here and are coaching with professional jobs involving either a national team or the only Kiwi the only full professional team in the country as well, which is definitely, yeah, like coming from my more, that's um, extremely, I was going to say rewarding. It's not quite that. It's encouraging because you tend to find when it comes to, like, for example, National League football, you hear a lot of, in particular, a lot of English accents on the sidelines, which is fine. Like, it's cool, but also where are the local coaches sort of coming through? It's not everyone has to have been in an academy when they were 12 at a Premier League club to be able to coach a team. Like, it's something that the NBL does extremely well. Is um, there's definitely an established basketballing culture and identity in this country, and you get that not just from the players but also from very good high level coaching, because a lot of those guys as well are assistants at Aussie NBL clubs or have been in the past. Like, these are some pedigreed coaches that we have in this competition, and they're locally grown, locally grown produce.
Also far more culturally diverse than other sports.
Absolutely, as well, for sure.
Like, I mentioned it on the roadshow with the Hawks roster, but it's not just the playing group, it's all the coaching stuff. It's not like you're just saying whether they're from New Zealand or not, just a bunch of old Pākehā dudes coaching a team, which is what you see in other sports right now. Those NBA
pretty common in the NRL, for example.
Well, less so the Kiwi-NRL, like.
Well, rugby, yeah, no, not speaking. I'm thinking more Australian clubs where you get the old white dude coaching a team of.
It's even more. Sorry, you just cut out there, lagging. But yeah, so big up the NBL for their cultural diversity at all levels. But what you're saying, like, you watch some of the Australian sports programming, it's like, this is far too white. Like, there is just like 4 40-year-old Pākehā dudes talking. It's like, I don't even understand how this isn't appealing at all. Like, get some different voices in there. Get some diversity in your mixer, like the NBL, who I think basketball making massive moves in Aotearoa as well. And we'll touch base with the NBL as we move forward as well. We do have news about the Wellington Phoenix. They got a new coach for next season, though. For next season, because we still have football to play this season, and it's really important football. The Wellington Phoenix face the Western Sydney Wanderers in Sydney tomorrow night, Friday night. Western Sydney Wanderers are a spot ahead of them on the A-League ladder. The Wanderers are 4th, the Phoenix are 5th, and based on what I saw against the Brisbane Roar at Eden Park last week, this is a monster game. This is a really important game. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens on Friday night in Sydney.
Yeah, fascinating game. Really fascinating game, because the Phoenix have obviously not been, well, actually, some of the performances, the aspects within the games have been quite good. They certainly haven't been a 90-minute team at any point this season, but they've only taken 1 point from their last 4 games. They're definitely stumbling. It's not great. They're continuing to miss very good chances, and yet they're right there. There's still they could lose their next 2 games and still make the finals. Like, the way that's mathematically possible. The way the table is going, it's as close as it is. Teams are taking points off each other. That's all cool. Western Sydney are 6 points ahead of them with a better goal difference. But they do play them this Friday night. And then Western Sydney's last game is against Melbourne City, who are the top of the table team. Maybe they lose that. Maybe the Phoenix beat them here. They'd have to also overcome a lot of goal difference to catch them. But it's not impossible they could still get 4th. Like, that's not out of the question yet, because of the way that the final 2 rounds of fixtures have worked out. They're going to need to do a lot more than they have been at the moment. But this is, I don't know, because we could talk a lot about the new coach here, but it sort of isn't that much to say. Like, it's a nice internal promotion. It's been done smoothly. It's been handled very well from Tele in the weeks previous, just sort of straight batting all the things. Like we knew he was probably leaving, but he didn't make a fuss about it. For him, it was always, yeah, well, we're just going to focus on this next game, make the most of the season, all these kind of things, which is exactly what a coach in his position who's expecting to leave but also wants to win a championship before he goes. It's exactly what that coach should be doing in that position. The fact that they announced he was going to leave on Friday, then straight away were like, and we're going to name a replacement in a couple of days. And then they did that. And then it's just the assistant stepping up to take over. Like, it was all done so smoothly that I think it minimizes the distraction as well as you possibly can leading into a very crucial game. Because I know there's a coaching change coming up, but you can't waste the opportunity that they have, which is to make finals football. And if you make the finals, is what might happen. Even if they go into it with 1 point from their last 6 games, what if you scrape through and win on penalties in the first round, get a bit of confidence, win your next game, and then you're in a grand final? It's that soon. It only takes 3 wins from, even if you come in the lowest of the finals qualifying spots. 3 wins is all it would take to win a championship from there. It's not that far. I don't know. They drew with Western Sydney earlier on in the season. It was at home. It was one of the many games in which they were 1-0 up, didn't score a second goal, conceded in the last 15 minutes, and then drew 1-1. So they're at least a team they know they're competitive with. I suppose there's also a little bit of funkiness because they haven't watched Western Sydney in ages, but I assume old mate Rudan is still there, which makes it interesting when you have 2 former, because one is latched another couple games, hopefully another 5 games, maybe not, but yeah, man, I think it's, as far as the football goes, it's just the same. It's the same question. It's same questions that need answering from the Wellington Phoenix. It's just, can you make the most of your best moments within the game? Like, can you convert your chances, avoid conceding silly ones? I think those 2 things will go in hand. I think if you keep the game level for a lot longer, then the strikers are going to feel less pressure to have to put the ball away. And if the strikers do put the ball away, the defenders are going to feel less pressure, leading to mistakes. I do think it's as much a mental game as anything for the Wellington Phoenix at the moment. So I don't know. They've been making it harder and harder on themselves, but not quite capitalizing. It doesn't get that much harder than having to go and play a team that is higher up on the ladder in a game where you really need to be getting something out of it away from home on a short-ish turnaround as well. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's just what they need, though. Maybe this is a team that just needs to be fully backs up against the wall, no other chances, and here we go. There's no more excuses available to them. Everything's just gonna click because it has to, because there's no other option. Maybe that's what the Wellington Phoenix have been guiding us to this whole season, just waiting for the last possible moment and then strike.
Do you see any like tweaks to the playing team that could impact this game? We've seen Kryev has kind of had his minutes reduced. I don't know how you're supposed to win games of football when there's a different backline playing most weeks, but what do I know? But I do find that kind of interesting. Do you see any, because you have mentioned some of the strikers are lacking confidence and goal scoring confidence. Is there any tweak that you could make there? Bringing back Ben Wayne or something? I don't know. Is there something you could do slightly different for this Wanderers game to make sure you get the dub? Or is it just a case of, fellas, no one expects us to win here. Let's go out and get the job done?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that they just need to be a little bit better. They just need to be a little bit better in each penalty area, basically. The stuff in between that's fine. But there definitely are a couple of, not tactical tweaks. I don't think we'll see them playing in a different style or anything. I actually don't necessarily. It's one of the things I wrote about when I was talking about why they've kind of floundered a bit recently. Was, I think one thing they're really missing that they've had in previous seasons is tactical variety. And it's not even about whether they're the better options. It's just about whether they're different options. It's about being able to say 70 minutes gone, a striker for a striker because it's fresh legs. Bring on a striker for a striker because this guy likes to cut inside and pass. This guy likes to run in behind the defense. It's just different. It's showing a defense who's been used for 70 minutes to Costa Barbarouses angling in and looking for a 1-2 pass to for example, last year, I think one of the guys that was very handy for them just to give them this variety was Joshua Soterio, who also not a great finisher, although had his best finishing year in his last season with the Knicks. I'm trying to remember where he went to. I don't think he went to. Did he go to Western Sydney? I can't. Was he one of the guys that went to Newcastle? I can't remember. He might have gone to Western Sydney, actually. He might be playing against them. But he was very good for being able to play, for example, when they were playing up against a high line. Soterio would often start in the front too because he can run in behind because he's fast. He makes really good movements off the ball. They don't just... It's not about whether he was better than Ben Wayne or Gary Hooper or whoever they had last year. It's the alternatives. It's just that he was different. It gave you something to be able to say, well, for this particular matchup, we can go with this option instead of this option. They don't have that so much this year. Everyone's a little bit more same, which is why they're trying to get a lot more out of Jan Sass than they've been able to so far, because I think he's the one guy who really does change things. But he's such a random dude. You just roll the dice when he gets the ball. If it comes up odd numbers, he's going to do something ridiculous. If he comes up evens, he's going to do something brilliant. Like he's just kind of like that. There's no in between with him. As we saw on the weekend, he scored a lovely goal. He also gave away a penalty and missed a bunch of chances. Like I don't think you see him dropped, but you might see David Ball or Costa Barbarouses dropped in order to bring Kraev back into the starting level. Not sure where Ben Old is with his fitness, but if he's available, I don't think he'd start, but he might be someone who might come off the bench and do something. Definitely in the back line, though, where Josh Laws will be back from suspension, which gives you that left-footed centre-back option if you want that, unless you just want the battling, forget about the possession stuff. Let's just get the scrappiest defenders on the park and hope that does the trick to keep a clean sheet with Payne and Wootton at centre back, and then you can keep Callan Elliott there, because a sneaky thing that I found out last week doing some research is that they haven't won any of the 6 games in which Callan Elliott hasn't started. All their wins, they obviously haven't won every game Callan Elliott has started. They've been thrashed in a couple of them, but all their wins have come in games that Callan Elliott did start. That is a common denominator. So, and he did have a very good impact off the bench in the second half last week, which is when we did see a rare instance of that Sutton, Elliott, Payne, Wootton back four. I would like to see that continue, but I would also understand if he wants to recall Josh Laws for a bit more control with someone who's just a better ball player than the others, and that left-footed option, which allows you to open out and access the sidelines as well. So we'll see how that goes, because there's definitely a few options that Tele has here that he could tweak things slightly, and he has a couple of decisions to be made.
I was about to say, like, for a team that is they're not struggling to score goals, but there is kind of a lack of class and just.
Well, the funny thing is, they're the only team in the A-League to have scored in every game. They just don't score too often enough. Like, they're good for that one goal. The second goal is the hard one.
Something to help that does seem really funky attacking fullbacks, because Sam Sutton and Callan Elliott, they love to boom forward. They're suited to their roles. They got a bit of attacking flair. It does seem beneficial. But this
Elliott leads the same in assists, so there you go.
There you go. However, this is also a team that doesn't, as I said in our Patreon podcast earlier in the week, they do not have the defensive grit and mana of the Warriors. So what you laid out there with the back four is like, do you want more attacking threat and maybe less of a less defensive solidarity, or do you want more defensive solidarity and taking away an attacker? Or is it a sneaky case of maybe the best defensive back four features Callan Elliott and Sam Sutton as well? I don't know, but it's just a little journey I went through as you're talking there.
Yeah, it's almost like you got to ask yourself, or the coaching staff got to ask themselves, do we think we're more likely to win 3-2 or 1-0? And adjust accordingly. Salt to taste.
Considering they don't score more than one goal, I think they need to go for the
It
one
might
nil
it might well be that. It might be that you just have to back yourselves to score that one goal, and just if you could like give everything for a clean sheet, sit a bit deeper, pick the whichever fullbacks you think are the best, but it might be less about personnel and more about instructions. Be like, okay, maybe this is not the game, Kellen, where you go making that overlapping run. Maybe you need to like drop and hold it just a little bit more and make sure they can't counterattack in behind, which is, I think, an area where the Knicks have been pretty vulnerable for a lot of their recent weeks. Definitely Melbourne City ripped them to shreds doing that, but just being able to move the ball really quickly in behind the fullbacks while they were forward and just attacking out wide with forwards in motion on the break, and they tore them to pieces at times there. Where yeah, maybe that's not so. It looks like a tough fix. It just makes it when that's happening. It looks like okay, you're just being outclassed by a really good team. But maybe that's not as much of a fix as it would appear. Like it might just be about okay, we can't be quite so ambitious with the ball. We also need to focus on protecting our goal because if we keep a clean sheet in this game, we get a positive result. Because a draw away to Western Sydney, I know it'll take away any possibilities of a home semi-final, but that's unlikely as it is anyway. So just getting anything and putting pressure on teams behind them because there's a couple of teams that are only 3 points behind them as well. Well, they can't catch you if you get a point. So it's just a matter of like it might be a pragmatism over ambition in this kind of game.
Let's swing into the NRL, and we're going to, because the Warriors, they don't play till Tuesday, so it's just under a week away from when we're recording. That is the Anzac Day fixture against the Melbourne Storm. So we'll get around to that game, but we're not going to put it up top and digest it full banger. We do have Rabbitohs versus Panthers on the Thursday evening, this evening. And these are two good teams. No James Fisher-Harris, but you still got Moses Leota, Scott Sorensen. They are Kiwis in the Panthers team. One sneaky thing for the Rabbitohs, they do have Josiah Karapani on the extended bench. And this is interesting because he scored 2 tries in Jersey Flegg last weekend. So he does seem to be moving between Jersey Flegg and New South Wales Cup. And I don't, it's a fool's errand to try and make sense of those, like how fringe NRL players filter down to the different levels, trying to make sense of why that is. Who knows? But Karapani did play Jersey Flegg last week, scored 2 tries, and he's on the extended bench in the NRL team this week, which is not the first time this season he's been on the extended bench. So we're tracking Josiah Karapani, very good centre, very powerful, very nimble-footed from East Tamaki Rugby, and I think he's just from Otara. There is a bit more funk in the Eels versus Broncos game. Watching that Eels game versus the Bulldogs, and I'll talk a bit about these two players, but there was a lot of Dylan Brown kicking to Hayes Perham, and I loved it. Just seeing two Kiwi-NRL youngsters going at it. Dylan Brown was doing more kicking. I think he had a bunch of, let me just pull up his page here. He had 3 forced dropouts, and that was the first game this season in which he had any dropouts. And he also had 91 kicking meters, so that's why it did feel like Dylan Brown was kicking to Hayes Perham a lot, because he was kicking more than he has done all season. He had 91 kicking meters against the Bulldogs, and his previous best was 64 in round 2, and they are the only games this season in which he's had over 50 kicking meters, because Mitchell Moses does most of the kicking for Eels. So Dylan Brown is really good at rugby league, and I love watching Dylan Brown play footy. He's already got 5 try assists this season, so he's chasing the 17 try assists from last season. So his 5 try assists and 8 offloads are tie or better than the 3 seasons prior to last season. So he's kind of made a development leap. Last season he had 17 try assists, 16 offloads, both of which blew away his previous 3 seasons. Now he's got 5 try assists, 8 offloads, and he does seem to have hit a neck level, which is crazy because he made the World Cup squad for the Kiwis. He's also averaging 136 run meters per game, which is better than a lot of NRL props. And that is also a career best. He was 125 meters per game last season. Now he's up to 136. So whatever you thought about Dylan Brown last season, he might be better this season. But I don't know if the Eels are necessarily better. That's the interesting thing. And Dylan Brown, he's tackling at 93%. So he's a very good tackler, as we know, one of the best running tackling halves in the NRL. Eels have won 2 games in a row. And you've also got Wiremu Greg. He's on the bench. I do love a bit of Wiremu Greg. He's a big bopper through the middle from Northland. So you got 2 Northland brothers there, Dylan Brown and Wiremu Greg. But unfortunately, Wiremu Greg, his minutes and his usage sums up the weird vibes of the Eels, because he played like 18 minutes and you just never see him again. He starts, he plays 20 minutes, and you never see him again. And it's the same thing, like, who knows what is happening on the Eels bench? Makahisi Makatoa should be playing NRL every single week. He's from New Plymouth. To always talk about Makahisi Makatoa. But he's just yanked in and out of the NRL team every week. Jura Momosia was pretty good to start the season. Unfortunately, the Eels were losing, so now he's deep. He's been brushed aside to New South Wales Cup. Ofahiki Ogden's in and out of the fringe NRL mixture every week. There's just no sense there. Like, I can't figure out what's happening. And it's good that Wiremu Greg's in the top 17 right now, but he's not getting much minutes because it's the Eels. So it's very strange. I don't know what's happening. They are playing the Broncos, and you've got Jordan Ricky trucking along. He's already got 4 tries this season, which I believe is tied with 4 tries last season for his career best. So he scored 4 tries in 22 games last season. Now he's scored 4 tries in 7 games. And Jordan Ricky is going to be playing against Mitchell Moses on that edge. So this could be a big Jordan Ricky game if the Broncos are firing.
And are you expecting them to be firing?
I don't know. It's just 2 good teams. Rabbitohs versus Panthers, 2 good teams. Broncos versus Eels. Broncos are hot right now. Eels, they've won 2 in a row, but they're not necessarily in great form. They do have that weird vibe thing. Regular listeners will know I'm kind of waiting for the Broncos to slip up. But that's just me being a hater, so I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. But the Eels are tough. So I don't know if the Broncos, because the Broncos are all throw the footy around, power, high voltage, maybe high voltage rugby league.
Horsepower.
That's what the Eels do. Eels are high voltage. They're, I don't know, horsepower. I'm going with high voltage.
Well, high voltage works for the Eels because you can play the electric eel thing for sure.
Yeah,
there's got to be another, I don't know, a horse metaphor.
I wasn't linking them to the team. Now I see what you're doing with the horsepower. Didn't actually pick it up.
Okay, right.
With, so, that shows what a silly bugger I am.
We got
Next game. Also for the Broncos, not a lot of Dean Mariner. Just tracking that. Would love to see him there playing NRL. But if Jesse Arthurs can't play NRL because their backline is stacked, Dean Mariner's not going to get many minutes either. Bulldogs versus Sharks. Did mention Hayes Perham. He's just cheekily averaging 167 meters per game. And the best example for Hayes Perham's footy is Shans Nickel-Klukstad. They're very similar types of fullbacks. They're not necessarily going to be throwing their last pass. I don't think they're last pass fullbacks where they get into shape and they can throw the cutout pass, they can throw the short ball. Don't view them as that type of fullback. I think Shans Nickel-Klukstad is similar. He's maybe a tier below, a notch below the Dylan Edwards, Clint Gutherson type of fullback. I think he's right there, but fair play on bias. And then Hayes Perham is kind of a notch below them or a couple of notches below them, but similar style. They're always going to mop up at the back. They're very safe. They get through a lot of running work, and they just help the team function as best as they can. However, the Bulldogs aren't winning. So I'd love to see Hayes Perham playing in a winning Bulldogs team at fullback. Like, that is best case scenario. But the Bulldogs just don't seem to be able to be as good as Andrew Webster. They're facing the Sharks, and the Sharks are just always good. Ronaldo Mulatalo, Braden Hamlin-Uele, Britton Nakora. They're very good at rugby league. So are the Sharks, their whole team. And I think the Sharks are better than the Bulldogs. But I am hoping for a big Hayes Perham game. And if that's a win, I'll be there for it as well.
Yeah, it might just be because they absolutely smoked the Dragons recently, but I think the Sharks are a very, very good team. How much with Hayes Perham, is that like, because it seems like I don't know, did he get that starting fullback spot a little bit out of the blue, or was that something that was maybe telegraphed, or has that come as a surprise to see him as prominent in such an important position as he has been for someone who probably been around the NRL for a couple of years, but he wasn't necessarily an established player we might have thought, especially for a team like the Bulldogs who have done a lot of high profile recruiting to try and work their way out of their struggles. To see a young Kiwi lad getting the fullback gig, is that something that sort of came out of the blue, or is that expected?
Certainly wasn't expected. It was quite surprising, but it makes a lot of sense. And I'm very curious what happens because, of course, the Bulldogs have signed Stephen Crichton for next season. If you're paying him a lot of money, you might be paying him a lot of money to play fullback, and it's like, okay, what's Hayes Perham up to? It was surprising, but there are a lot of connections that make it make a lot of sense. Hayes Perham, I think his first kind of NRL junior system gig was through the Panthers. So Phil Gould was there. Cameron Ciraldo was coaching in the junior system at the Panthers at the time, and that didn't really work out for whatever reason, maybe just homesickness, I think. Then Hayes Perham signed with the Warriors while he was at Rotorua Boys High School, and then he comes through the Warriors system. He played a lot of fullback, though. He was playing fullback. I think he might have played New South Wales Cup fullback. He might have played Jersey Flegg fullback at the Warriors. He's always had that skill set, and he was playing first 15 rugby for Rotorua Boys High School. So he's got that skill set as well. So he can pass the ball both directions, and he could even kick probably if required. But I think it's the Ciraldo Gould connection, because they were both at the Panthers at that time, and like you're seeing it with Andrew Webster at the Warriors. There are a lot of those like connections where like, yeah, I coached them back in 7 years ago in this junior team, and I know who he is, and I like what he does, and I can trust him in our system. And that's how a lot of different opportunities come about. And I think that is the Hayes Perham example at the Bulldogs. Surprised a lot of Australians because they know nothing about Hayes Perham, but it also surprised me. But as I learned about it, it made so much sense, just with the decision makers like Hayes Perham. I like Hayes Perham. He's good at rugby league. But he was in that Warriors situation along with Paul Turner, who's starting. He's mainly starting in the halves for the Dragons reserve grade team. Like at the Warriors, they were just kind of centers and there wasn't a role for them. So that's the good thing, is there's now so many NRL teams with expansion that some team is going to have the right opportunity for you. Cowboys versus Knights. Cowboys, no Griffin Neame, no Wakan Faris. Knights, Leo Thompson, I've talked a lot about him. He's right there behind me. He is in fantastic form this season, and he's still starting prop this week, even though Jacob Saifiti returns to the bench. And you've got Kalen Ponga returning, so then Tyson Gamble goes back to the bench, and they've got Kurt Mann in the halves. So it's good for Leo Thompson to be starting now, even as they get some troops back. And then heading into Origin, I think will ramp up even more. And good to see Greg Mars, who's shining at the Knights, playing his best footy there because he was a junior Kiwis monster. And he's just been floating around reserve grade, spent time in the Eels system, went back to the Titans, and then he got a swap to go to the Knights again. So many NRL teams, there's going to be an NRL team that has the opportunity for you. And that's the same thing with Greg Marzhew because he couldn't get a gig anywhere, really. He started at the Titans, couldn't really progress. Went to the Eels, couldn't really progress. Went back to the Titans, couldn't really progress or kick on. Now he's in the Knights and he's starting most weeks. Dolphins versus Titans. Don't have much to say here. Like, we've talked a lot about the Dolphins all season. And you've also got the Titans. I love Isaac Leo. I like his work, but the Titans just don't seem very good. And if the Titans aren't very good, Keanu Kinney is still sitting on the bench waiting for his opportunity. And I don't know how it comes because Jaden Campbell's I love Jaden Campbell at fullback. You've got the Brimson, Tanner Boyd, Stimson, not Stimson, what's the other guy? Sexton. They're all there. And I don't see the opportunity for Keanu Kinney, but he is always on the extended bench. He's starting at fullback for Burleigh Bears. And he is an exceptional talent coming up their system. Tigers versus Seagulls. 3 out of the 4 centers in this game are from New Zealand. Seagulls have Morgan Harper, who has, he wasn't starting the season at center, but now he's got a few games at center. So I'm curious to see if he can hold on to that spot. Asu Kepaoa and Stafford Toa starting at center for the Tigers. Junior Tupo's got a bit of form as well. He's getting a bit of hype. He's also from Auckland. Stafford Toa's really, I love Stafford Toa, and he's always playing in the best Tigers footy. But again, he wasn't starting round 1, and there's just so much weird stuff happening at the Tigers. Straight up, I think they aren't very good. I don't know what really, I don't think Tim Sheens is that great a coach right now. All of Isaiah Papali'i's stats have decreased, and they kind of shunned Stafford Toa to start the season, even though he plays his best footy. When he is playing, the Tigers are playing their best footy. And I think you might have Stafford Toa against Morgan Harper. Alternatively, you'll have Asu Kepaoa against Morgan Harper. And speaking of the Seagulls, Christian Tuipulotu should be playing NRL every single week, but right now he's on the fringe because Jason Saab and Ruben Garrick are the starting wingers, so there's not much of an opportunity for Tuipulotu, Otahuhu Jr. And then we get to Roosters versus Dragons. There is no way the Dragons are winning this game, not because it's the Roosters, but because Joey Manu is starting in the halves. As soon as I saw that, there's no chance for you Dragons. Sorry.
No, I can't disagree with that. This will be the one that gets the coach fired by the appearances, because I think it could be a little bit surprised he survived last week. But I think they seem to have some entanglements that they need to clear up, not the least of which being that their best player is extremely loyal to the coach that everyone else doesn't seem to like, which is a confusing situation that probably reflects many years of bad management with that team. But yeah, I think this one could be quite a hefty. I think this might not be one of those like Sean Johnson kicking the penalty goal in the last minute to decide the result. I think this is probably one that they have a very clear idea after 20 minutes that one team is probably going to win by many, many points.
There's a lot happening for the Roosters as well. Brandon Smith starting at hooker. All my Kiwis World Cup stuff, my like breakdowns of how they were playing revolved around the dummy half threat of Brandon Smith and Joey Manu. Not just Brandon Smith, not just Joey Manu, but both of them are exceptional dummy half runners, and that was together for the Kiwis. So I'm interested to see how that develops at the Roosters. Obviously, Wairea Hargrave's still one of the best props in the NRL from Rotorua. And you've got the return of Satili Tupanuia. He is on the bench after he suffered, I think it was an ACL last season. So good to see him back. Obviously, all the discussion around the Roosters, Sam Walker being dropped. Well, that's beneficial for Joey Manu. And Joey Manu is one of the best rugby league players in the world. And of course, like Roosters, high profile club, there's no shortage of talking points. Joseph Suaaliti's there. You've got the Angus Crichton situation, like all this stuff. Victor Radley is awesome. Lindsay Collins is awesome. Tedesco. Joey Manu's the starting six, and he's one of the best fullbacks in the world. He does whatever the Roosters want him to do. No fuss, no dramas, no drama queen stuff, no like, I need more money. It's Joey Manu. He's the man. And he's starting number 6. So I will be tuned into that game for sure. And then you get the Warriors versus Storm. Storm of Will Warbrick. They've got Nelson Asafa Solomona, but Kiwi fans also tap in with Alec MacDonald. He's a bench forward, grizzly, hard-working. He's from Auckland, moved to Brisbane. Classic Storm story, no fuss. He'll come off the bench, and he's definitely not as powerful or as robust as Tom Ale, but he's getting similar NRL minutes, and there's different ways you can go about your bench forward role, and Alec MacDonald is more of an effort, intensity, mana type of bench forward. And of course, we've got the Warriors. There'll be a preview coming. We'll talk a lot about it over the weekend, but it's not till Tuesday, so it's just squeezed to the back here. But I don't know what to expect from the Warriors in this game. If they win, it's a really great sign. But I think all Warriors folks should be managing expectations here. You do get Marata Niokore back. Still no Tamaita Martin. Still no Mitchell Barnett. But this is also the case because Melbourne Storm haven't been as good as they would hope this season, and they're playing at home, and it's always a big occasion in Melbourne for this game. And I think just as long as the Warriors show the same effort, that's all that matters. As long as that thread that has been throughout every single game this season, win or lose, as long as that is there, it's all good. I'm not worried about how they play their footy, the tactics, the styles, the execution. Of course, if all of that happens and they win, fantastic. But the thing we're tracking and learning about the Warriors is how they can show up for every single week. How you can play at the same intensity every single week. And this is another learning juncture for the Warriors against the Storm.
Well, where are we? 1, 2, 3. I was going to say you just the Storm don't seem to have been on the level that they have been in the past, although they did drop off a little bit last year as well. But they are a notoriously good home team. I was looking at their home things to be like, yeah, but they may be, I think it's 4-3 season, but their home form is, when then I looked at their home form and I forgot they did actually lose to the Bulldogs in week 2 at home. So, but since then, they've won 24-14 against the Tigers in a home game, which goes without saying. But then they did beat the Roosters 28-8 2 weeks ago. Good result at home. Then they lost to Manly. So that because these are the Anzac Day fixtures, the 2 most recent ones that we're talking about, and they tend to throw up some pretty funky footy, I think, historically speaking. Like, they tend to be games where there's strange things can happen. That's always the case when you get those kind of holiday games and a lot of this like Christmas Day basketball in the NBA and things like this, like Boxing Day Premier League fixtures. Like, the big holiday ones always just seem to have a glorified aspect of them, which can make things a little bit frisky. And I think that is definitely one of those things where it's therefore another reason why it is a nice test for the Warriors at this stage, regardless of the result, because if they do serve up that effort and sort of intensity and sticking to the game plan stuff that you're talking about, it's also not the same as doing that in a home game against the Dogs or the Cowboys or whoever. Like, you're doing it away to the Storm on Anzac Day on a Tuesday as well, because that's notable, not just because it's a holiday, it's also notable because it's a different timeline of preparation. Like your recovery is different, your travel times are different. You're playing in midweek basically. Like those are the kind of things that can throw a team out of rhythm. So it therefore seems to be one of them, just like a nice timely opportunity for the Warriors to just, I don't know, tick another box, just to take one more week off and say we're still this team. We can still do this, regardless of the result, because you can play that exact game and lose. But you just that's and if that's the case, that's okay. Like that's still a team that's going to win more than they lose if that's the case.
Couple of specifics for the Warriors just quickly before we finish. Dylan Walker, he'll be defending on the left edge with Jackson forward. That's where you're going to have Iliasa Katoa playing for the Melbourne Storm. So you're going to have Hughes and Katoa on the right edge, and I'm not scared because Dylan Walker, he's a middle forward defending in the halves, and Jackson forward, the best Dragons player ever, he's really good as well. So I think that's a good matchup. That's a very solid position for the Warriors to be in. And also, just their bench, Freddie Lussick starts at number 9, Bailey Surinen's number 14. Last week, Bailey Surinen filled in for Freddie Lussick off the bench at dummy half. But he can play every position. So it's like if Freddie Lussick doesn't need a break, he can stay there and build his combinations out through the game. Otherwise, Bailey Surinen can give him a spell, and you've just got the 3 forwards on the Warriors bench.
Yeah, I think the rankings go number 1, Jackson Ford, number 2, Reg Gasnier, number 3, Mark Gasnier. I think that's how it goes.
Well, I learned writing about Matthew Tomoko that he is definitely better than Zach Lomax, so no need to worry about that.
Yeah, right. Well, I like Zach Lomax, but he's not in the top 3 Dragons of all time. So, yeah, can't compete.
He's also not better than Matthew Tomoko.
Tomoko scored the go-ahead try in that game as well, didn't he?
He
very influential performance.
Right. Raiders have a bye. FYI, Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Cha-cha.